He called me Barren in front of everyone, his parents, his siblings, even the cousins. I was 32, married to Damon Whitfield, who was 35. We had been together for 7 years, and in those years I had watched the love between us fade into something colder. What had once been affection slowly turned into criticism, blame, and silence. The problem, at least the one Damon never let me forget, was our struggle to have children. Month after month, year after year, nothing changed. At first he tried to hide his frustration, but soon it poured out in sharp comments and heavy sighs. He never agreed to see a doctor himself. Instead, he made it clear in every way possible that the fault was mine. "You're supposed to give me a family," he once said, looking at me as though I had failed some basic test of being a woman. I learned not to answer. I learned to carry that weight in silence, because whenever I spoke up, he found new ways to cut me down. That night at his parents' house, though, he went further than ever before. The Whitfield family was gathered around the long oak table, plates filled with roasted chicken, garlic bread, and potatoes. His sisters teased the cousins about how quickly their children were growing. There was laughter and chatter, the kind that usually filled the room at these gatherings. For a moment, I thought maybe the evening would pass without incident. But Damon leaned back in his chair, smirk tugging at his lips, and said, "Well, don't look at us. Clara's barren." The word felt like a slap. The laughter stopped. Forks froze halfway to mouths. His mother shifted uncomfortably, his father cleared his throat, and the cousins stared at their plates. Not one person looked at me. Not one person spoke up. I felt the heat crawl up my face, my chest tight with shame. My hands gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles ached, but I didn't let my expression change. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Damon sipped his wine like he had told some harmless joke, and no one dared challenge him. In that silence, I realized something important. His family would always take his side, even when he was cruel. They would let him say anything, no matter how humiliating, as long as it kept the peace. But for me, that night was the breaking point. Damon thought he had destroyed me with that single word. What he didn't know was that he had only planted the seed of what was to come. I sat there quietly, swallowing the pain, but inside I made a promise. The next time he tried to shame me, I would be ready. When I first met Damon, he was the kind of man people noticed the moment he walked into a room. He was ambitious, full of charm, and made me feel like I was the only person in the world who mattered. In those early years, he spoke about dreams of a house filled with children, vacations by the sea, and growing old together. I believed every word because his eyes used to shine when he said them. But the Damon I live with now feels like a stranger. Somewhere along the way, the warmth drained out of him. The charm that once made me feel special turned into sharp words and dismissive looks. Instead of planning a future with me, he started blaming me for the one thing we didn't have: children. Every conversation about it circled back to me, never him. When I suggested we both get checked, he brushed it off with a laugh, insisting he was fine. "The problem isn't me," he said more than once. His certainty left no room for argument. The blame wore on me, but I wasn't alone. My best friend, Marissa Lane, noticed how I had started to shrink inside myself. She would take me out for coffee and gently remind me that Damon wasn't the man I thought I had married. "You can't let him take away your dignity," she told me one afternoon, her hand resting over mine. Her words gave me something to hold on to when I felt like I was disappearing. Even as I tried to hold my head up, the cracks in our marriage grew wider. Damon's habits changed. He started working late, or so he claimed. Nights stretched longer and longer, with no explanations that made sense. When he finally came home, he would head straight for the shower before even saying goodnight. He had never done that before. It was such a small detail, but it gnawed at me. His phone was always face down, and when I walked into a room, he would sometimes tuck it quickly into his pocket. I noticed everything, but I kept quiet. I watched him carefully, memorizing each lie in the way he said it too smoothly, each excuse that didn't quite add up. He thought I was too timid, too broken to question him, and maybe for a while he was right. But inside me, suspicion grew like a heavy stone I carried everywhere. At night, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every sign, every shift in his behavior. Something was happening, something he didn't want me to see. Part of me wanted to confront him, to demand the truth, but I wasn't ready yet. I chose silence, not out of weakness, but because I needed to be sure. So I waited, and I watched, and with each passing day, the feeling that Damon was hiding something only grew stronger. One evening while folding laundry, I noticed something on Damon's shirt. At first it looked like a smudge, but when I held it closer to the light, my stomach dropped. It was lipstick, a deep red shade I had never worn. I stared at it for a long time, my fingers frozen on the fabric. There was no explanation he could give that would make that mark innocent. I put the shirt back in the basket and felt a heaviness settle over me. For days, I carried that image in my head, the red stain that didn't belong to me. I wanted to confront him, but a voice inside me told me to wait. If he was careless enough to come home with proof on his clothes, he was careless enough to slip again. One night, Damon claimed he had to stay late at work. Something in the way he said it didn't sit right. He grabbed his keys quickly, avoided my eyes, and was out the door before I could answer. I waited a few minutes, then slipped on my coat and followed at a distance. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, but I stayed far enough behind so he wouldn't notice. He didn't drive to the office. Instead, he pulled into a quiet restaurant across town. I parked a few cars back, heart pounding so hard I thought it would crack my ribs. Through the glass window, I saw him sit at a table, glancing at his watch. A few minutes later, she walked in. She was younger, with styled hair and a bright smile that never once dimmed. Lydia Cole, that was her name. I had heard it once or twice when Damon mentioned work, but I had never paid attention. Now, watching her slide into the booth beside him, I wished I had. The way she touched him made bile rise in my throat. Her hand lingered on his arm, her laughter spilled out too loudly, and she leaned against him like she belonged there. Damon didn't push her away. He welcomed it. Their heads bent close together, as if they were the only two people in the room. And then came the final blow. Lydia leaned over and kissed him. Not a quick peck, but a kiss filled with the kind of affection he hadn't shown me in years. My vision blurred, but I refused to cry. Sitting there in my car, gripping the steering wheel, I realized the truth I had been avoiding. Damon hadn't just stopped loving me, he had replaced me. The betrayal cut deep, sharper than any of his cruel words had before. All those years he spent blaming me for our empty home, all the insults about children, all the shame he piled on me, it had all been a cover for this. He was unfaithful, and he thought I would never find out. But as much as it broke me, something else rose up inside me. I wouldn't walk away quietly. If Damon thought he could humiliate me in private and in public, then discard me when it suited him, he was wrong. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I started the car, my hands still trembling, but my mind clear. From that moment on, I knew I wasn't just a wife clinging to a broken marriage. I was a woman preparing for the fight of her life. Helen Whitfield always had a way of making me feel small, but that brunch was the worst. She had invited me over on a Sunday morning, saying she wanted to catch up. Damon wasn't there. It was just her, me, and a table covered with eggs, fruit, and toast that I could barely touch. From the moment I sat down, I could feel her eyes on me, studying me like she was searching for weakness. She started with small talk, asking about work, about whether Damon and I had been keeping busy. I answered politely, even though I knew where this was headed. Helen never asked questions without a reason. She circled around the topic until she finally set her teacup down and said, "Clara, don't you think it's time you tried a little harder?" I froze, the fork in my hand still halfway to my plate. She kept talking, her voice calm but her words sharp. Damon is 35. He isn't getting any younger. A man needs children. A family. You have to find a way to give him that. My throat tightened, but I forced a smile. "We're doing what we can," I said softly, though every word felt like a stone in my mouth. Helen leaned forward, lowering her voice as if she was sharing a secret. "Sometimes, when a woman can't give her husband what he needs, he starts to look elsewhere. It's only natural. A man shouldn't be deprived of happiness." Her meaning was clear, sharper than any knife. She wasn't warning me, she was telling me. She wanted me to know Damon's patience was running out, that if I didn't succeed soon, he would find what he wanted in another woman. I looked at her across the table, and something in her expression told me she already knew he had. I didn't answer right away. My hands trembled in my lap, but I kept my face calm. Inside, though, my chest burned. Helen wasn't just guessing. She suspected, or maybe she had already heard whispers about Lydia. Maybe Damon hadn't even bothered to hide it from her. That realization made my stomach twist. His betrayal wasn't just private anymore. It was something his own mother might be excusing. I excused myself as politely as I could, saying I had errands to run, and left most of my food untouched. The moment I stepped out of her house, the air felt different. I stood on the sidewalk, my hands clenched into fists, and let the anger wash over me. Helen thought she could shame me into silence, just like Damon had. They both believed I would stay quiet, accept the blame, and keep pretending everything was fine. But they were wrong. If Damon and Lydia wanted to play their game in the shadows, I would drag it into the light. If Helen wanted to hint about Damon finding happiness elsewhere, I would make sure the whole family knew exactly where he had been finding it, and at what cost. That brunch was the moment I stopped feeling like a victim and started thinking like someone who needed a plan. They thought they could break me down piece by piece, but I was already building something they couldn't see coming. I finally decided to get answers for myself. For years, I had carried the weight of blame, letting Damon's words sink into me until I almost believed them. But deep down, I needed to know the truth. So I booked a fertility appointment without telling him. The waiting room smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. My hands shook as I filled out the forms, but I kept reminding myself this was necessary. The tests didn't take long, and within a week I was sitting across from the doctor as she read over the results. Her tone was calm, professional, but her words landed like a thunderclap. Everything looks perfectly healthy on your end. There's no medical reason you wouldn't be able to conceive. Relief washed over me, followed quickly by anger. All those years of insults, the humiliation, the shame, it wasn't me. It had never been me. The doctor continued, suggesting that my husband should also be tested. It's always best to check both partners, she explained. I nodded, already thinking of how I could make Damon agree without triggering his pride. At home, I chose my words carefully. I told him the doctor thought it was smart for both of us to be tested, just to cover all bases. I smiled as if it was nothing serious, nothing threatening, just a routine step. For a moment, I thought he would refuse. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed, but then he sighed and said, "Fine, if it shuts you up." The day of his appointment, he treated it like a chore. He barely spoke to me on the way there, and when it was over, he acted as if it meant nothing. But when the results came back, the truth was undeniable. The doctor's report was clear. Damon had low sperm count and poor motility. The problem was his, not mine. I sat in the office, staring at the paper while Damon shifted uncomfortably beside me. His face went red, and he mumbled something about doctors being wrong all the time. I didn't argue. I just folded the report neatly, slid it into my bag, and said nothing. When we got home, I placed the report in a folder and locked it away. My hands trembled as I closed the drawer, but it wasn't from fear, it was from power. For the first time in years, I held the truth. Damon thought he could crush me with his words, shame me in front of others, and carry on with his secrets. But now I had something solid, something undeniable. The blame no longer belonged to me. I didn't show my anger. I didn't confront him. Instead, I carried on as if nothing had changed. But inside, I knew I had just gained my weapon. And when the right moment came, I would use it. After learning the truth from the doctor, I forced myself to act as if nothing had changed. Damon went about his days with the same arrogance, still making sly remarks, still coming home late, and I smiled through it all. I cooked his meals, sat beside him at family gathering, and played the role of the obedient wife. On the surface, I looked quiet and loyal. Inside, I was taking notes, watching carefully, waiting for him to slip. At dinners with his parents, I lowered my eyes when he spoke, nodding at his words like I agreed with everything. Helen would talk about children, about how families needed to grow, and I kept my mouth shut. Damon thought my silence meant surrender, but it meant I was hiding what I knew. The report from the doctor sat locked away, burning like a secret I held close to my chest. Still, I knew that one piece of evidence would not be enough. If I wanted to expose him, I needed more. That was when Marissa stepped in. She had always been the one person I could trust, and when I told her what I had discovered, she didn't hesitate. "If he's lying to you, then he's lying in other ways too," she said firmly. Together, we started digging. Marissa worked in finance, so she knew how to look at numbers in ways I didn't. One afternoon, while Damon was at work, I handed her a stack of bank statements I had found tucked in his desk. She spent hours going through them, highlighting transactions, circling dates, and pointing out what didn't add up. Hidden in the mess of bills and expenses were regular transfers to another account. Smaller amounts, spaced just enough apart to seem normal at first glance, but the pattern was there. The money was going to Lydia. Rent payments, shopping sprees, even what looked like a down payment on a car. Damon wasn't just betraying me emotionally, he was funding his mistress's life. Every dollar he spent on her was a dollar stolen from the home he pretended to care about. I stared at the proof, my chest tight with anger. All the nights he came home complaining about money, all the times he scolded me for spending on groceries or clothes. He was lying. He had been living a double life and making me feel guilty while he poured our money into hers. Now I had two truths, one that showed his weakness as a man, and one that showed his betrayal as a husband. I tucked them away, keeping them safe, knowing I couldn't use them yet. Timing mattered. If I revealed them too soon, he would twist the story, make me look bitter, make me look like the problem. No, I needed the right moment, a stage big enough that he couldn't run from it. So I waited. I smiled at his mother's question. I pretended not to notice the smell of perfume on his clothes. I kept my voice soft, my head bowed, and my mask in place. Damon thought he was in control, but I was the one holding the truth. And when the time came, I would make sure the whole family saw exactly who he really was. Damon loved to show off in front of his family, so when he announced a big barbecue at his parents' house, no one was surprised. He talked about it for weeks, planning the menu, calling relatives, making sure everyone would be there. To the outside world, he was the perfect son, the perfect host. I kept my expression pleasant whenever he mentioned it, but inside, I knew this was the stage I had been waiting for. A few days before the gathering, I got a call from his sister Renee. She had never been one to defend me openly, but she wasn't blind to her brother's faults either. Her voice was low, almost apologetic, when she told me something I already suspected. "He invited Lydia," she said. "He told our parents she's just a friend from work, but I thought you should know." The words made my chest tighten, but I thanked her calmly. Renee didn't like what Damon was doing, but she wasn't brave enough to confront him herself. Still, her warning was all I needed. If he was bold enough to bring Lydia into his family's home, then he was bold enough to believe no one would stop him. That arrogance would be his downfall. For the next 2 nights, I barely slept. I laid everything out on the dining table in our house when Damon wasn't around. The medical report that proved the truth about his infertility, and the bank statements that showed every dollar he had funneled into Lydia's life. I made copies of everything, neat stacks tucked into a slim folder I could carry easily in my bag. Just looking at them gave me a strange mix of pain and strength. The same papers that had once broken me now felt like armor. When the day of the barbecue came, I took extra time getting ready. I chose a simple but elegant dress, one that flattered me without being flashy. I brushed my hair until it shone and applied makeup with a steady hand. I wanted to look calm, unshaken, someone who could not be pitted. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. She wasn't the one who had sat in silence while being called Barren. She was ready to speak. On the drive over, Damon chatted about the food and the guests, his voice cheerful. He had no idea what I carried in my bag. He didn't notice the quiet strength in me, because he had long since stopped looking closely. When we pulled into his parents' driveway, the backyard was already buzzing with voices and laughter. Tables were set up under the trees, the smell of grilled meat drifting through the air. I spotted Lydia immediately, standing too close to Damon's cousins, smiling like she belonged. My hands tightened around my bag, but my face stayed calm. This was the stage. Everyone was here. And I was ready. The barbecue started like every other Whitfield gathering. Music played from speakers in the yard, children ran across the grass, and adults clustered in groups with plates of food and glasses of lemonade. I moved quietly among them, smiling when I had to, speaking politely when spoken to, and never letting go of the folder tucked safely in my bag. I had promised myself I would stay calm, no matter what. Damon thrived in this environment. He was at the grill, laughing loudly, flipping burgers as if he were the perfect husband, the perfect host. He greeted each relative with hugs and jokes, while I lingered near the table of side dishes, watching. Every so often, my eyes drifted toward Lydia. She stood near the edge of the patio, her dress too bright, her smile too wide, like she was daring someone to question her place there. She met my eyes once, and the curve of her lips told me she thought she had already won. The afternoon stretched on until most people were full and relaxed, gathered in chairs with drinks in hand. That was when Damon struck. His sister Renee had made another comment about how quickly the cousins' families were growing, and without missing a beat, Damon smirked and said, "Well, Clara isn't exactly giving me any airs, so don't hold your breath." A few cousins laughed uncomfortably, trying to brush it off as a joke. Others stared down at their plates, unwilling to meet my eyes. And in the corner, Lydia smirked, her head tilted as though she were enjoying a private performance just for her. For a moment, I stayed still, letting the silence sink in. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears, but my voice, when it came, was steady. I set my glass down, rose from my chair, and said, "I'd like everyone's attention for a moment." Conversations died away. Heads turned. Even Damon's laughter faltered as he looked at me, irritation flickering across his face. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. My hands did not shake. "For years," I began, my tone calm, "I have carried the blame for something that was never mine to carry. Damon has told all of you, in one way or another, that I am the reason we don't have children. Tonight, I'm setting the record straight." I opened the folder and held up the papers. "These are medical reports from a fertility specialist. I was tested, and I am perfectly healthy. Damon was tested too, and the truth is clear. He is the one who cannot father children." Gasps filled the yard. Some people covered their mouths. Others whispered to each other in shock. All eyes swung toward Damon. His face went pale, the smugness draining away as the weight of the truth settled over him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The silence was no longer mine to bear. It was his. The whispers after the medical report hadn't even died down before I reached back into my folder. Damon still sat there, pale and stiff, but I wasn't finished. My voice stayed steady as I said, "And that's not the only truth you all deserve to hear." I pulled out a second stack of papers, this one thicker. Copies of bank statements, receipts, and photographs I had gathered over the past week. I handed them one by one to the relatives closest to me, and they began passing them around. Conversations stopped again as people leaned in to read. "These," I said clearly, "show exactly where Damon has been spending his time and money. Not on me, not on our home, but on Lydia Cole. The moment her name left my lips, every head turned toward the woman standing near the patio. Lydia, who had been smirking all afternoon, froze. Her painted smile slipped away as if someone had yanked it off her face. Eyes widened, voices rose in shock, and the air seemed to tighten around her. Helen was the first to react. She shot to her feet, her voice sharp enough to cut the air. "Shameless!" she shouted, pointing straight at Lydia. "You come into my home, smiling at my family, while sneaking around with my son like some thief. Disgraceful." Her anger didn't stop there. She swung her glare to Damon. "And you, bringing this woman here, humiliating your wife, humiliating all of us. Do you have no shame at all?" Damon's mouth opened, but before he could speak, another cousin passed around the photos I had taken of him and Lydia together, sitting too close at a restaurant, kissing in a parking lot, her hand in his as if she belonged to him. The proof was there in black and white. There was nothing he could say to erase it. Lydia's face drained of color as more eyes landed on her. She stood frozen, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, but her body trembled. The confidence she carried earlier vanished. She looked cornered, like a trapped animal with no way out. The smirk that once told me she thought she had won was gone, replaced with fear and shame. Damon finally tried to raise his voice. "This isn't what it looks like. Clara is twisting things." But no one listened. They were too busy shaking their heads, too busy staring at the paper, too busy seeing the truth for themselves. For once, his words meant nothing. I stood calmly, my hands folded, watching as everything unraveled. The silence that followed wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to them, Damon and Lydia, who had built their lies so carelessly, only to be exposed in front of the very people they thought they could fool. And as Lydia stood frozen, unable to defend herself, I knew she finally understood. She was never untouchable. I calmly announced that I was filing for divorce and would no longer be part of Damon's lies. My voice didn't shake, and I didn't need to raise it. "I won't carry this weight anymore," I said, looking straight at him. "I'm done covering for you. I'm done living inside your lies. From today forward, I'm choosing myself." The words came out steady, and the silence that followed was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. Damon just stared at me, his mouth opening like he wanted to fight back, but nothing came. For once, he had no words. I stood a little taller, lifting my chin and turning to face the family that had just watched everything unfold. "Thank you for your kindness over the years," I told them. "I know this isn't easy to hear, but I couldn't keep living inside the lies. I needed to tell the truth. I hope you understand." There was no anger in me anymore, no bitterness. Just a calm certainty. I picked up my bag and turned toward the front of the house, leaving the weight of the past behind. As I walked away, voices rose behind me. I heard Helen's voice sharp and furious, scolding Damon so loudly that even from the driveway, her words carried. "You've disgraced this family, Damon. You humiliated your wife and brought that woman here. Have you no shame?" Lydia stood frozen near the patio, her face burning red, her hands clutched together like she wanted to disappear. Cousins whispered to each other, but not one person tried to defend him. I didn't stop. My steps grew lighter with every stride down the driveway, like I was finally peeling off chains I'd worn for years. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel broken. At the curb, Marissa's car was waiting, just like we planned. She rolled down the window and gave me a proud smile the moment she saw me. "You did it," she said softly as I opened the door and slid into the passenger seat. "You finally took your power back." I let out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The house, the noise, the years of blame, they all started to fade behind me as we drove away. The folder with the papers sat in my bag, but it no longer felt like a burden. It was proof that I had faced the truth, proof that I had taken control. I didn't feel sadness, not anymore. I didn't feel regret either. All I felt was calm, peace. I wasn't leaving as the barren wife Damon tried to make me out to be. I was leaving as the woman who had finally chosen herself. As the house disappeared in the rearview mirror, a small smile found its way onto my face. The chapter was closed, and for the first time in years, I was free. Do you think I made the right choice by leaving Damon and walking away from his lies, or should I have given him another chance? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more.